Okay, let's be real for a second. This bread did not turn out the way I planned. If I used artificial red 40 dye, this heart would be bright neon pink. But because I used real beets, it caramelized. It got dark. But look inside. This is my love your gut sourdough, a Valentine loaf made with fermentation, beets, and zero artificial junk. It's proof that sometimes real food doesn't look perfect on the outside, but it's so much better for you on the inside.
Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Priyal Desai, a board certified physician and a culinary medicine specialist. If you are new here, my goal is to help you feel lighter and less bloated without giving up on the foods that you enjoy. For example, bread. Today I'm going to show you how I made my Valentine-inspired loaf. Instead of grabbing artificial food dye, which can trigger inflammation in some people, I did a healthier swap. I used beet puree. Beet puree gives us color, fiber, and heart health benefits. So let's get started.
Here's our star ingredient, beets. Now, physiologically, beets are incredible. They're rich in nitrates. In the body, nitrates convert to nitric oxide, which helps dilate your blood vessels and improve circulation. So, this isn't just a pretty pink bread, it's actually supporting your blood flow. I steamed a couple of beets in my instant pot, then I peeled and chopped them, then I turned them into a puree in the blender. After making it into a smooth puree, I cooked them in the instant pot on the saute mode until it got a thick tomato paste like consistency. The idea is to cook them further and concentrate them to get more color from these beets in our bread. I measured the needed amount in a bowl and stored the remaining beet puree for later. I started with my standard sourdough base. For that, I measured out the hard white wheat. Then I ground it into fresh flour with my Nutrimil Impact Mill. If you're curious why I use fresh milled flour in my recipes, then I will link the video here that explains the benefits. I also have a video comparing two different kinds of mills, so if you're trying to decide where to start, you can refer to that video on my channel. Now let's chat about why I actually prescribe sourdough to my patients who struggle with bloating. It comes down to fermentation. Commercial yeast works fast, like in an hour, but wild yeast, it takes time. During this long rise, the bacteria are actually pre-digesting the gluten for you. They're breaking down the hard to digest proteins, so your gut doesn't have to work as hard later. So here I added soy milk, water, olive oil, and honey to the flour. Then I added my bubbly sourdough starter. Then with the silicone spatula, I mixed everything. Then I used my clean hand and mixed everything to make sure there was no dry flour left. After that, I covered the bowl with some plastic covering and let the dough rest for about 30 to 60 minutes. After the rest period, I melted some unsalted butter in the microwave and added that to the dough along with salt. I incorporated butter and salt well with my hand here. After that, I let the dough rest again for another 30 minutes. After the rest period, I cut the dough into two portions with the help of a plastic scraper. Then to the one portion of the dough, I added the measured and cooled beet puree and some apple cider vinegar. The acid in the apple cider vinegar helped retain the color of the beet. Beets add water, so if your dough feels bit sticky, don't panic. Just work it gently. This is the difference between chemical dyes and food. Real food has water content, fiber, and texture. It behaves differently. I added some extra salt here and mixed that in. Then I did some stretching and folding from different sides. Here I did the stretch and fold with the plain dough. I did total 3 stretch and folds with both portions of the dough every 30 minutes. Think of this mixing stage as the bread's workout. We aren't just combining ingredients, we are building structure. I look for the dough to go from shaggy and rough to smooth and extensible. If it tears easily, it's not ready. It needs to be strong enough to hold our swirl later. As you notice here, as the dough is getting stronger, it becomes more stretchier. Once the 3 stretch and folds are over, then we let the dough bulk ferment until about 50 to 75% increase in volume. We are not aiming to double it. Fresh milled flour ferments faster, so the bulk rise may be done in a couple of hours depending on the room temperature. As you see here, the dough will appear lighter, airier, and there will be some bubbles at the edges. Here I flattened the dough into about 10 by 14 inches rectangle. I used the technique called lamination. It's my favorite way to add fillings because it keeps the layers distinct. I gently popped the big air bubbles. Then I took my additional beet puree and spread it into a thin layer. Then I used a high quality sugar-free berry jam and spread it into a thin layer over the top of the beet puree layer. If you overfill this, the dough gets heavy and won't rise properly. You just want enough sweetness to taste it without compromising the structure of the bread or your blood sugar stability. Here I took the beet dough out on the counter and spread it out into the rectangle just like what I did with the plain dough, and then layered it gently on top of the white plain dough. See how gentle I am here? I'm trapping the small air bubbles inside. This coil created that beautiful spiral when I sliced it. I popped the large air bubbles as they can create a tunnel or collapsed areas. I twisted the dough and closed the seam properly. I realized that this was a very large amount of dough to fit into my panettone, so I ended up dividing the dough into the half, which exposed some of the inside filling. At that point, I just stretched out the plain dough from the corners, pushed the pink dough bit inside, and folded both the sides. I sealed the dough properly and put it into the panettone, which was well dusted with rice flour. Now, this was supposed to proof in the fridge overnight. The process is called the cold retard. However, since I was running out of the time and I wanted to bake my loaf on the same day, I ended up proofing the dough at room temperature. This is the second portion of the dough which I ended up baking into the sandwich loaf pan. Once the center of the dough had risen about an inch above the rim of the pan, I baked the loaf at 375 degrees Fahrenheit for about 35 to 45 minutes until the internal temperature reached about 205 degrees Fahrenheit. Towards the end of the baking, I tinted the top with the foil to prevent overbrowning the top. Once done, I brushed some clarified butter on the top. The loaf looked perfect until I tried to take it out of the pan. Since I inverted it out of the pan while it was very hot and soft, the top of the loaf got dented. Because this dough is high hydration, made with fresh milled whole grains and naturally fermented, the structure is more delicate when the dough is right out of the oven. Next time I'm going to let it rest in the pan for 10 to 15 minutes or use a parchment sling to pull the whole loaf out of the pan. After a couple of hours, the dough in Benetton was ready to bake. I used the parchment paper to get the dough out from the Benetton. I sprinkled some rice flour on top of the loaf. Then I used a stencil to create the heart right on top using beetroot powder. Then I scored the bread with a lame around the heart shape. But here's the chemistry lesson I learned the hard way today. Beetroot powder is made of dehydrated beets. Beets have natural sugars. What happens to sugar at 450 degrees Fahrenheit? It caramelizes rapidly. If this was red food dye, it would stay bright because it's synthetic. But natural food color reacts to heat. And here's the reality. The heart is definitely rustic. It is charred. But you know what? I am okay with it. Because look at that interior. Soft, open crumb. That beautiful beet pink swirl. And the smell was incredible. It was tender, not overly sweet, and it didn't taste like vegetables. It just tasted like really good, complex bread. And I know that by eating this, I'm nourishing my microbiome, not just filling my stomach. So, lesson learned. Real ingredients behave differently than chemicals. And sometimes that means a charred crust. I will take that trade off any day. If you want to try baking with intention this Valentine's Day, I have put the full recipe in the description. And if you want my guide on how to safely eat carbohydrates without spiking blood sugar, check out the link below. I am Dr. Desai, prescribing you a little more patience and a lot more real food. See you in the next video.